Welcome back to my X-Men series. For those of you who are new here, I'm going through each of the X-Men movies and reviewing them one by one. This is coinciding with both the series' 20th anniversary and the release of the final film in the franchise, The New Mutants, which is out now, and I haven't seen it yet, but soon. Let me know what you think of the X-Men movies in the comments below, and make sure to give this a thumbs up if you like these reviews. It helps me out immensely if you do that. I already reviewed the first 4 movies in the franchise, and I'll leave a link to that playlist in the description in case you missed any of them. And if you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews on the rest of the series. But now, let's talk about the 5th film in the franchise, X-Men First Class. This takes place in the 1960s and focuses on a younger Charles Xavier, now played by James McAvoy, who gets recruited by CIA agent Moira McTaggert, played by Rose Byrne, to help take on a powerful villainous mutant named Sebastian Shaw, played by Kevin Bacon. They cross paths with a young Magneto, now played by Michael Fassbender, who has his own vendetta against Shaw, and they team up, tracking down other mutants and putting a team together to stop Shaw from starting a nuclear war. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know we'll be discussing spoilers for this. My reviews of newer releases tend to be spoiler-free, but with older movies, especially with franchises such as this, there are a few spoilers I want to discuss. So if you haven't seen this by now, this is your spoiler warning. But anyway, here we go. This time around, Matthew Vaughn, the writer and director of movies like Kick-Ass and the Kingsman movies, takes over directing duties, and he also co-wrote this with his screenwriting partner Jane Goldman. They actually rewrote the script after it was already written by Thor screenwriters Zach Stent and Ashley Edward Miller, and all 4 of them get screenwriting credits. And I'll say, this is the breath of fresh air the X-Men franchise desperately needed. After both The Last Stand and X-Men Origins disappointed fans, one to a much bigger degree than the other, it looked like interest in X-Men movies was starting to wane a bit, especially with the Marvel Cinematic Universe beginning to gain popularity. But this not only breathed new life into the series, but also brought it back to its roots. The first 2 films dealt heavily with discrimination and having to live in fear of discrimination. That was lost just a bit with The Last Stand, and especially with Origins. Here we see a major return to that theme. At this point, mutants are unaware of other mutants' existence, and they all thought they were alone in the world. And even when they find one another, most of them have become so self-conscious about their powers that they still feel like they fully can't be themselves. One storyline that gets heavily explored is the contrast between how Xavier deals with his powers versus how Mystique, now played by Jennifer Lawrence, deals with her powers. Unlike most of the other mutants, Xavier's able to hide his powers since he only has telepathy and he doesn't have any physical signs of mutation. Mystique, however, goes through most of the movie disguising herself in a normal form. She's even that way around Xavier. Here it's shown that they grew up together and lived together as foster siblings, and he first met her in her natural form and wasn't afraid of her. Though as adults, while he never outright says it, he heavily implies he prefers Mystique to stay in her disguised form, and he'll avoid talking about if he likes her in her natural form. And she goes through most of the movie struggling with accepting herself, as she feels her own foster brother doesn't even really accept her. And she's even jealous of him. When the X-Men are all together and get more comfortable with one another, she still spends much of the movie disguised. And we even see all the other mutants still have that same sense of discomfort. Even though they now have each other and are clearly more powerful than a human with no mutation, there are scenes when they're all together and a non-mutant will stare at them awkwardly or make fun of them, and the mutants don't even threaten them or anything. They're just uncomfortable and their feelings are hurt. Because besides the villains, most of the mutants don't spend much of the movie just making open threats towards anyone who bothers them or gets in their way. They're given a lot of depth, and we're able to empathize with them greatly. The film also captures the uneasiness felt towards mutants that was seen a lot in the original films through real-world events here. This takes place at the height of the Cold War, where there was a lot of paranoia over threats of nuclear warfare, and that political climate is captured perfectly here. And the discovery of mutants just adds further to that paranoia, with some even thinking they're a big hoax at first. Like when Xavier first shows someone his powers, they think he's a spy, and a lot of that real-world anxiety ends up adding fuel to the fire and causes conflicts to escalate, especially in the 3rd act. But while this heavily reflected real life more than any other X-Men movie, something that also distinguishes this from other X-Men films was that it leaned in a little more to its fun side, and it balanced both the dark social commentary with moments of levity, which the other movies did, but not to the extent that this did, and it was able to pull this off without having any jarring tonal shifts. There's a brighter color palette to this film than the first 2 X-Men movies. The score can feel a little upbeat at times without feeling too bright and cheery, and the interactions among all the team members are actually pretty funny. We even get 2 montages, one of Xavier and Magneto recruiting the other X-Men, and another of them training and getting control of their powers. And there were actually a number of moments between those 2 that had me laughing pretty hard, especially in the first montage where Hugh Jackman returns for a Wolverine cameo, and that had to be one of the best cameos I've seen in a movie, to be honest. And like I said, whenever the movie would shift from serious to humorous, the tone never felt like something was off. In fact, this captures the feel more of a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, and I think having a screenplay originally written by the Thor screenwriters and the rising popularity of the MCU at the time played heavily into that. But regardless, it worked. And when we do eventually get to see the X-Men in the MCU, I hope they emulate the tone of this movie in particular. Now, while the idea of an X-Men prequel was in the works for some time, this film ended up being the combination of two projects, an X-Men team prequel and a Magneto solo prequel. While Wolverine ended up being the only film with the X-Men Origins title, the original idea was to do solo movies about each of the X-Men, and a Magneto film was in the works around the same time as Wolverine. However, that got scrapped and everything from that idea worked its way into this. The villain has direct ties to Magneto's past, and we even see a fairly brutal opening scene of a younger Magneto. Shaw hears of his powers and forces him to use them to move a coin, otherwise he'll shoot his mom, and it is a heartbreaking scene to see unfold. But this is what fuels Magneto's arc, and I will say, of all the performances, Michael Fassbender is by far the best here. While Ian McKellen is excellent in the original movies, gave Magneto a very distinct personality, and at times made him feel incredibly threatening, Fassbender's portrayal of a younger Magneto is just badass. The man is just so full of rage, and we see when someone crosses him just how menacing he can be. But he's also not just this one-dimensional angry guy for most of the movie. He's shown to have a different worldview than the other X-Men, in particular Xavier, but it comes from a lot of traumatizing personal experiences. And at the end of the day, he is actually capable of caring for others, which is seen through both his friendship with Xavier and his mentoring of the younger mutants. The rest of the performances are all on point as well. McAvoy makes for a great Xavier, and while he can go pretty big in films like Wanted and Split, he actually does a fantastic job channeling that sagely feel of Xavier that Patrick Stewart also captured so well. Jennifer Lawrence is also great and gives my second favorite performance, as her storyline has the most amount of nuance after Magneto. While Rebecca Romijn made Mystique feel badass in the original films, Lawrence gives the character so much more depth and so much more humanity. This is easily the best portrayal of her. Nicholas Hoult was another big standout as Beast. While we saw bits of this with Kelsey Grammer in The Last Stand, Holt hones in on the character's sweeter and more caring side, and we even see a bit of a potential romance between him and Mystique, and that storyline was done well for the most part. I had a big smile on my face whenever he was on screen. Kevin Bacon also gives one of his best performances ever as Shaw. This guy was just pure evil, and Bacon just captured perfectly how sinister this guy was. But he also did it in a very scene-chewing sort of way. He goes big in most of his scenes, but he never feels campy or too over the top. He was one of the most well-done villains in all of the X-Men movies, and I especially enjoyed any scene between him and Fassbender. As for criticisms, I actually don't have that many, nothing that ruined the film or anything, but there are a few things worth pointing out. There are a couple of instances where things will move on just a bit too quickly, like there's one of the recruits named Angel, played by Zoe Kravitz. She's with the X-Men for like 1 or 2 scenes before defecting to Shaw's team. It took her like 2 seconds to make up her mind there. Also, the Beast-Mystique potential romance fizzles out a bit towards the end. Part of why there was chemistry building up between them was that they both felt alone and were both struggling with not feeling accepted. And then Beast tries to invent this cure, and when he takes it, that's what leads him to having the blue appearance and growing fur. And when everyone sees him this way for the first time, Mystique is just like, hey, this is who you really are now, and in one sentence, that pretty much ends their storyline. She gives him a quick shout out before she takes off with Magneto, but it was a bit of a weak end to the story. Speaking of Magneto, I know they were trying to set up the rift between him and Xavier, and that was done well for the most part, but the reveal that he really agrees with Shaw and he thinks mutants and humans can't coexist felt very sudden, because he kind of softens up throughout the movie as he builds up a relationship with both Xavier and the rest of the team, and we didn't see so many hints that he may actually feel a totally different way. It was mostly fine. I would have just liked to have seen the idea planted early on. And I thought Rose Byrne was fine. Moira wasn't exactly a standout character in the movie, but Byrne's performance was good. But the ending where Xavier kisses her and wipes her memory is just dumb. I'm not sure if he's capable of such powers in the comics, but there are no hints that he's ever capable of doing something like that in any of the movies, and it just felt like this cheap Deus Ex Machina. Especially because it leads to this weird continuity error, considering she appeared in The Last Stand and seemed to know who Xavier was there, which I know is one of the many continuity errors in this franchise, especially as we get further into these prequels. This isn't the most egregious mistake, but it's pretty noteworthy. Outside of that, my issues with the film aren't things I necessarily hate, but they could have just been done better. Overall, this is a much-needed breath of fresh air to the X-Men franchise, and as great as the first 2 movies are, especially given how important they were to superhero movies in general, I actually like this one more. It hits all the same themes of the first 2 movies, but it manages to also have much more of a sense of fun, and finds a nice balance between that fun and the dark social commentary. The action's great, it's funny at times, the characters are all well written, and the cast does a fantastic job, with Michael Fassbender and Jennifer Lawrence giving my 2 favorite performances. It's by far one of the better entries in the X-Men franchise, and when they return to the MCU, I hope this is the feel they go for. X-Men First Class gets a 9 out of 10. Up next, we go back to Wolverine solo movies with The Wolverine, which I always thought was one of the more underrated movies in the series. I'm looking forward to discussing it. Stay tuned for that and more 2020 reviews coming soon. So let me know, did you see X-Men First Class, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like it more than the original movies, less than the original movies, and do you want to see any of these cast members come back for the MCU? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll catch you next time.